The Tudor Black Bay 54, not the 41mm Black Bay Black, not the 39mm Black Bay Black 58. No, this is the new 37mm Black Bay Black 54. It was one of the stars of the show at Watches and Wonders this year, so of course I had to make my way down to the AD to check it out. Of course I was going to talk about this watch. Good thing is, it's really worth talking about, and not just about the size, but we will talk about that too. I'm going to give you the overall conclusion up front. Great watch. Now, why I think it's great and why it's not just about being smaller and more accessible to more people, well, you have to stick around for that. But I can give you a hint. It's down to two people, Sean Connery and Marty McFly. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's get through the basics. Tudor released their first METAS certified movement this year, which is to be found in the third iteration of the original 41mm Black Bay. This is not that. It has the MT5400, which is the movement that you found in the Pelagos 39. In the BB58 line, you'll generally find the MT5402 movement, which, as far as I can tell, is just a different size, but otherwise functionally equivalent. We have a COSC certified automatic movement with 70 hours of power reserve housed in a case that has a water resistance of 200 meters. Tudor has also opened their new manufacture this year, and I'm sure this will lead to movements having even higher quality than they had up till now. The bracelet is the one we have come to love and to some extent hate. It still has those faux rivets on the side, but with this version you get the deployment glass with the T-fit adjustment system and all the modern Tudor bells and whistles. I cannot say enough good things about the T-fit clasp though. It's one of the best systems out there, it has low resistance and it's easy to set. Plus the actual clasp looks great. I also can't understate how much the on-the-fly adjustment actually matters. Spring bar adjustable bracelets are often finicky and the BB58 is one of the more finicky ones. I've seen my fair share of clasp scratching when trying to poke out spring bars and the like. By now, on-the-fly adjustment should, if possible, be a baseline. It's like sat-nav in a car. It should be standard. As for the rivets, I don't mind them and you barely notice them anyway. At a first glance, this is a smaller version of the BB58 in black, which in turn is a smaller version of the original Black Bay. But when you take a closer look, you start to notice some very significant and important differences. The case is thinner by a little bit over a half a millimeter. It's not huge, but clearly noticeable, and more noticeable because of how that thickness is distributed. This is down to how the actual center case seems to be significantly thinner. The case back protrudes a little bit more, not quite like a bubble back, but more than a 58, and the dome crystal also takes up some height. This watch settles more into your wrist, wears low, like a 70s car with low suspension. This watch feels ridiculously thin. However, this thinness doesn't equate solely to it being a small watch on the wrist. The lug to lug is down from 47.5mm to 46. You notice immediately how much longer the lugs seem on the 58. The curvature of the lugs is more pronounced and drastic on the 54. Where the 58 takes time to curve, the flanks and lugs of the 54 protrude straight out and then curve down further out from the bezel. This looks good, and I think it in part contributes to why I think this watch has more presence than I had expected. This watch really got me thinking as to how insane it is how minor changes can majorly impact the look of a watch. Gone is the red triangle at 12 o'clock. A lot of people will likely miss that triangle. The snowflake seconds hands is now a lollipop seconds hands, which I think aesthetically is a huge improvement. The minute hand tapers in at the stem, making for an overall slim look. It's skinny at the waist, as it were. The crown stem is significantly shorter. The crown itself is also significantly smaller, and that's a nod to the original watch, which it pays its respects to. The ridges on the BB58 are close together and triangular. Coin edge is the term, I think. The ridges on the BB54 are more squared and there's more space between them. It comes off as much more similar to those that you would find on the 6538 Rolex or the Tudor from 1954, which is of course, I suppose, intentional. I know very little about machining, but in my layman's eyes, the BB4 ridges look like ones that were made on a vintage machine, where the ones on the BB58 look computer CNC'd through and through. I'm making assumptions here, but obviously they were all made on a modern machine. But the BB58 feels like a technique that required, relatively speaking, more modern machining technology as opposed to the BB54. The hash marks from 12 to 3 o'clock are gone, and the black bezel itself is a more matte black. I think that's the way I would describe it. It's less polish. It's less. Again, it gives me the feeling that the BB58 was built with technology that wasn't available in 1954. The numerals and markers are all a grey silver as opposed to the gilt look on the BB58. The indices and the numerals themselves take up less space on the dive bezel. This is because the hour markers are fatter but stubbier, so they have more space to breathe, much like the Tudor from 94 that it's emulating. The dial itself is glossier, less textured compared to the BB58. The crystal? Domed. Sean Connery and Marty McFly. Let's start with Mr. Bond. In 1962, Sean Connery starred as the world-renowned super spy James Bond 007 in the movie Dr. No. I remember primarily that movie because of Dr. No's underground lair and a very attractive woman in a bikini. Today though, I know that he wore a Rolex Big Crown 6538, which for a couple of 100,000 or a million could be yours. Although the 6538 has resemblances to the BB-54, this is not what struck me and this is not my point. Sean Connery, he was 6'2". He weighed in during his bodybuilding days at around 200 pounds. For the Bond movies, I think I would have put him in at around 180, 190 pounds-ish. Why is that important? Sean Connery has always and was always a man's man. He wore a 38mm watch and he looked badass. Now just hold that mental image. 6'2", 190 pounds. His wrist is definitely over 7 1/3 inches. Size and fit is not objective. You may think there is a right size for you. I lean towards 40 to 42mm watches, but I also have a 53mm Mudmaster and a 34mm Nomos. If you like it, you like it. Small does not mean effeminate or dainty. Sean Connery, 6'2", 190 pounds, would happily wear this watch. So before you say, I'm a big guy, this was too small for me, just think, are you as much of a man's man as Sean Connery? Now, Marty McFly. What did Marty McFly do? He traveled back to the future several times. What did he have to do as part of that? Well, he had to dress the part so he would fit in. Wearing the wrong clothing and he would not have fit in the time he arrived in. Spock and Kirk had the same issue when they traveled to San Francisco in the 80s in the movie Star Trek The Voyage Home. When it comes to the Black Bay 58, that watch is the watch that got built to go back in time with Marty McFly. It was built as a retro-styled watch with the intent of being able to go back in time. And then there's the Black Bay 54. The Black Bay 54 is not a new watch that is designed to go back in time just to a different time period. No, it's not. Well, it's built with inspiration from a watch from 1954, but it's still not a built to go back in time watch. It's actually, in my eyes, the complete opposite. This is the watch that looks like a brand new old watch. Marty McFly travels back in time with his BB-58 on his wrist. In 1958, people see his watch and they're like, that sure looks like a 1958 watch, but it feels off to them in some way. So he has to take it off, he has to hide it. It's revealing him as out of time, trying to fit in. He goes back 4 years. He finds the BB-54. He puts it on and travels to 2023. Stay with me now. Time travel is complicated. Somebody notices his BB-54. They say, that's a 70-year-old watch. How can it be in such good condition? Because of all those small details, this watch is an entirely different wearing proposition. The BB-58 is shabby chic, the practice of taking new and trying to make it look old. The BB-54 feels actually vintage. The BB-58 is new trying to be old. The BB-54 is old that looks brand new. We can talk about the competition, but there's little to none. Yes, you can get a ton of retro age type watches, but many of them, the BB-58, the Glasshoot CQ, the Omega Seamaster 300, mainly succeeded in new trying to look old. The Omega Trilogy Edition 300 came close, but it wears a little bit too big. If you want something that wears like this, then it's a 6538 or a Tudor from 1954. But that's gonna cost you a bucket load of money. Overall, this Tudor BB-54 is a strong introduction to Tudor's lineup. Some will be able to level some fair criticism at this watch because of its more neutral, potentially more bland appearance. It is more broadly appealing, much like the Pelagos 39, and that is because it doesn't have the red triangle. It is because the crown stem is shortened. It is because there is no gilt on the bezel. That breadth and broad appeal is something that some may dislike, but by definition, many won't. Currently, this watch, though, is not just the smaller BB-58. It's distinctly different from the BB-58, wearing very differently and having a vibe entirely its own. I dig the versatility of black. I dig this brand new old watch vibe. Adrian Barker said he likes this watch in the same way he likes his Rolex Explorer 36 from 20 years ago, but he couldn't explain why. I think it is down to this new old vibe. So the choice for you comes down to, do you want a watch that wants to go back in time versus a watch that comes from the past? I can see myself wearing it with a 7 1/3 inch wrist, and if it wasn't for it being unavailable to walk out of the store with initially, I would have bought it. What do you think? Are you man enough to wear a watch that's the same size as one that Sean Connery wore? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.